Professor Mahalakshmi and Professor Aditya Mukherjee for giving me the opportunity to present this paper on prices and wages in a conference organized to commemorate a very distinguished historian of polity and economy. Why prices and wages? Prices and wages are expressions of values of commodities and labor, including skill in an economy. They are also reflections of the state of circulation of money in a society. So in a sense, they are double-edged variables which give us a sense of both how goods and labor are circulating and what is the circulation of money. There is practically no work on prices and wages for the history of India before the Mughals. It's only with the Mughals that some price series are available, and therefore it's very important that we understand, if we have to have a long-term view of the political economy of medieval India, that how the two major variables, economic variables, behaved. Well, as we all know, the Delhi Sultanate was established in the 13th century by the Turks. One major aspect of the Delhi Sultanate was that it established not only a centralized political regime, which would mean that we can't really call this a period of feudalism, but also a new economic system based on a whole set of urban centers. Delhi is a very good example. You'll be surprised to know that between circa 1200 and circa 1400, 7 cities were established in Delhi, beginning with Qutub Mehrauli to Firoz Shah's Tughlaq city of Kotla. And many other cities outside, and old cities were revived and given a new lease of life. So massive urbanization. Also exchange network. Based largely on agrarian production and sale of agrarian produce in the market. The ruling class of this new dispensation was based in towns and not in the countrysides, and they were the major consumers of artisanal goods in cities, as well as of grain that was produced in the countryside. So there was this local and long distance trade. To use a phrase in the title of a very popular book by John Dale, the long vigil of living without silver was over, and there was a new set of monetization which emerged in India. In northern India in the beginning, and then it expanded to western India, eastern India, and parts of the Deccan. One major aspect of this was the land tax imposed by the state, which was very high. We don't have figures for the previous centuries, but we know that it was a very high agrarian tax collected largely in cash, which triggered a whole set of implications for the exchange economy. Although we have coins in gold, the two major currencies were the silver tanka and issued first in Bengal and then in northern India by Iltutmish and by later sultans. Very pure silver of high fineness coin, which circulated in all parts of the Delhi Sultanate. But another coin which was very, very popular was the Bilan coin, or Bilan Jeetal, which was a mixture of copper and silver, small quantity of silver, large quantity of copper, which circulated for all kinds of small transactions. So it was some kind of a small change for the Delhi Sultanate. It was a fractional coin of silver, which was um, which is very difficult to study, to put it mildly, because they, and Sanjay knows this, so numismatists have spent a lot of time working on it because they all look alike with varying contents of silver in them. So only the person who is using these coins in those days, or a money changer, or at the issuing authority, would know the exact value of the coin, or modern methods of analysis can tell you what exactly is the, so from 1 gunny to 48 gunny, these coins were divided into different sets of values. And that poses a big problem because a lot of our quotations, as we shall see, are in Jital, or this billion coin. They look a bit like that. This is the Jital coin of Balban, whose name you can read in the middle on the obverse. So this is the challenge. Most quotations of prices are in Jital, and Jital, as we shall see, is not only of different values, but also changes over time. So one Jital at one point of time is different. So making this an enormous task for any modern historian of prices and wages to bring them all to a common standard. Now, one remarkable feature of this time was the debasement of the silver tanka. So in the beginning, as you saw, the tanka was pure, but with the passage of time, it started not only losing its weight, but also its silver content. So the first lighter tanka was issued by Muhammad Tughlaq in 1325, which, as you can see, is 144 grains. And then it was debased further. It was debased when the silver content was reduced to 44, further still to 28, and further when towards the end of the 15th century there was almost a very small quantity of silver left in that. Now, since the Jital was a fraction of the silver tanka, the Jital also automatically got debased. And this is how you can make out the debasement of the bill in Jital. You can see that from the days of Alauddin Khilji, when the content of silver in a single gunny Jital was 2.83, it was reduced in Firoz Tughlaq's time to 0.47. So there was a debasement, progressive debasement of the tanka as well as, and this debasement has implications for our study of prices and wages. But first, why was silver debased? Well, one argument, very well-known argument, is that there was a worldwide shortage of silver. Starting from medieval Europe, historians of medieval Europe has called it bullion famine, and there's an enormous amount of literature on that. You can see the date 1370 is the beginning, but the famine started, if that is the link, started in India much earlier, because as we saw, the tanka of Muhammad Tughlaq is lighter in 1325 itself, and then debased just 2 years later. So the debasement, if the debasement is linked with worldwide shortage of silver, and please remember that all India's silver imports came from outside, particularly Europe. India had accumulated large amounts of silver over time through exports of commodities, but there was no quick method of dehoarding buried silver in India unless some major impulse, economic or political impulse, was applied to dehoard. So India therefore was dependent on fresh supplies of silver, and the hiatus was broken only when supplies, huge quantities of silver began to be supplied from the New World, from the mines of Peru, Mexico, and Bolivia, and that was around 1540s, which is also, by the way, the year in which Sher Shah introduced a pure silver rupiah. After a long period of bullion famine, the first silver rupiah was introduced by Sher Shah in 1540, which was a pure silver coin of the same kind as the Delhi Sultans had introduced in the early 13th century. So therefore, there is some ground to suggest that there was this link. Well, the famous fiduciary coinage of Muhammad Tughlaq also falls in this period, 1331-32. So if you are thinking that there was this shortage of silver in which a sultan was compelled to issue a copper coin, and there was something written on the coin which said that those who obey God obey the sultan, and vice versa. Which means that if you obey me, if you obey God, you obey me. If you obey me, you accept this copper coin at the rate of silver. That was the famous fiduciary coin of Muhammad Tughlaq. So you can actually see that the long distance linkage of this so-called token currency of Muhammad Tughlaq had nothing to do with his eccentricities. He was a very sensible, a harsh but sensible, like many of our modern history teachers, harsh but sensible king. So this is just to show you the. So it means that there was something, that there was a force. Indian economy was to an extent obliged to function to a rhythm which was not entirely its own, and not everything was under the control of the Sultan. This is to give you a sense of the sources which we have used in this essay. They look a lot, but believe me, evidence is very limited and stray. The star source is Ziauddin Barni's Tarikh-e-Firoz Shahi, which is a 14th century history written in Delhi by a Delhi intellectual who also wrote other works, and who incidentally gave us some very good statistics and information on the history of prices and wages in a particular, in the reign of Alauddin Khilji, and of course there are other histories. So for the sake of convenience, we have divided this whole study into three phases. The first phase is which coincides with the reign of Alauddin Khilji. Second coincide with the reign of his successor, Qutbuddin Mubarak Khilji. The third phase coincides with the reign of Firoz Tughlaq. And there is this little fourth phase, which is the Lodi Afghan phase, which is also very interesting because it seems as if forces working in the 14th century continued to work throughout the 15th century and the early part of the 16th century. How were prices fixed? There was a concept of just price in medieval Islamic societies, and there's a lot of literature on that. But frankly, no king would like to impose a regime of just price on the market, particularly the kind of market which we have in India, which has a mind of its own. So everything was left to the market, and supply and demand of both merchandise and money fixed. Taxation was a major invariable in prices, because if there is a rise in taxes, then prices would rise. If there is a fall in taxes, then prices would fall. Mercantile profit, state intervention, other factors responsible. Okay, so let me go straight to the statistics. This is the first set of prices we have, which I have converted into both nominal as well as silver prices, indexed to wheat. And you can see the relative prices also of the various commodities. This is the standard which we are going to use throughout for all the four phases. And therefore we have a common standard. We have the standard of grain of silver, through which we can, and we have the standard of wheat with which we can relate all the prices. Now, what is special about these prices? These prices are very low. We don't have prices for the preceding period, but whatever little evidence we have, it all suggests that prices are very low because they were fixed by the Sultan Alauddin Khilji was a very strict king, to use a mild expression, and he fixed prices in Delhi and in the vicinity of 300 kilometers and in the region of Doab, essentially for an army which was particularly stationed in this area to fight against the Mongols. Remember, this is the period when Mongols are invading India frequently, and there was a time when they came across the river Yamuna. So this army was specially recruited by Alauddin Khilji to be kept on a low salary, and therefore he had to correspondingly reduce the prices of everything in Delhi and in this area where the troop was stationed. How he managed to do that is a very interesting story, and Professor Irfan Habib has written a very illuminating piece on the relationship between the Sultan's agrarian policy, his taxation policy, and his ability to keep prices in control in Delhi. In the second phase, and you can imagine how happy people of Delhi were with Alauddin Khilji. And you will be surprised that, a tyrant like Alauddin Khilji is remembered after his death, and also this is partly our culture, that in 1354, I think 1320 he died, or 1316 he died. 1354, Nasiruddin Chiragh, who is a very famous Sufi Chishti saint of Delhi, writes or says in his conversation that, my God, what were those days when things were so cheap in Alauddin Khilji's period, and wonders how people go and tie threads. When he visits Alauddin's grave, they tie thread and they pray and they seek the Sultan's blessing. So I can understand, living in an age which is an age of high inflation and demonetization, one can imagine how people of Delhi were happy. So the second phase is very quickly dismantling of Alauddin Khilji's regime, because the Mongol invasion had stopped. There was no need for this standing army, and therefore what we see in Qutbuddin Mubarak Khilji's period is some kind of a laissez-faire economy in which the market was allowed to function at will, and prices therefore went up. And luckily we have a set of figures provided to us by a foreign traveler who recorded extensively India's conditions, including prices, and there we can see that prices have gone up. Wheat has gone up from 7.5 jitals to 12 jitals, and correspondingly all prices have gone up. The third phase is the most interesting phase, and I think I'll stop here. Because this phase continues right up to the first quarter of the 16th century, the late Lodi period, which is a period of secular deflation. Things are cheap, and a number of explanations are given by our contemporary writers, such as bumper harvest, lot of rain, blessings of saints, good governance. So you have no dearth of explanation. Unfortunately, none of this really explains what is happening in this period. Why is it that from 1360s to 1520s, it's a long period of time, prices are very low in northern India? And one explanation which has been given by Professor Habib in a book which came out just last week is that there was a shortage of silver, and therefore the price of silver was rising progressively in relation not only to gold or copper but also commodities. And so the same grain of silver is now buying more and more goods. That's one explanation which he has given, but as you can imagine, this is a tentative explanation, and one has to find out why is it that prices expressed in bullion, which is not silver, only a tiny amount of silver, but copper, also a decline in a long period of time. Why is it that people at different intervals recollect previous times and say that, look, prices were cheap then and high now, or then as you move further, a similar recollection takes place. Now, one explanation for this is that by the time of the Lodi Sultans, there is practically no silver coin. It's only billion and copper. And only it was Sher Shah's rupiah that revived the classical Delhi Sultanate. So it's quite possible that even if the coin had the same name, people now knew that the amount of silver in that coin was much less. And if the coin buys the same amount of wheat which it bought when it was full silver, then people can actually say that things are very cheap now. Because for a full silver coin, you can buy 5 times more with this coin. So that's another explanation of relative value of the coins and their silver content. Thank you.